Greetings! Let's begin our guided notes on square roots. I hope you all have your papers ready so that we can fill in the blanks. Our learning goal for today is we want everybody to be able to explain what a square root is and to describe some properties of square roots. For our lesson summary, it says the square root of a number is the number you can multiply by itself. So let's write that in. By itself to get to the number you started with. For example, the square root of 625 is 25, since 25 times 25 is 625. The square root of 10,000 is 100, since 100 times 100 is 10,000. The square root of 30 must be between something and something, since 30 is between 5 times 5 and 6 times 6. So it has to be between 5 and 6. We use the symbol, the radical symbol, it's called, to show square roots. For example, square root of 40. Figuring out a square root is the opposite of squaring a number. So the square root of 625 is 25, and 25 squared is 625. To model a square root, you can think of the number as the area of a square and try to figure out the side length. That side length is the square root. For example, the square root of 36 is 6, since a square with an area of 36 square units has a side length of 6 units. "36" is called a perfect square because the side length is a whole number. In other words, 36 is a whole number raised to the second power. That is 6 to the power of 2. Let's go on to the next page. Here it says, it is more difficult to physically represent the square root of a number that is not a perfect square. And most numbers are not perfect squares. We can only estimate ones if they're not perfect squares. For example, to model the root of 72, the square root of 72, you could make an 8 by 8 square that has an area of 64 square units. And if you look at this model right here, that's what this shows. This is 8 units by 8 units. And if you counted up each and every one of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you counted them all up, you'd get 64. You could also do that by multiplying 8 by 8, and the area that you would get in here is 64 squares. So, but that's not the root of 72. You'd need a little bit more. So, it says you have 8 square units left over that have to be split up evenly around the right and bottom edge of the square. That's what these 8 squares are here for, right? Because 64 plus 8 is 72. So this shows we would need an area of 72, but we would need to find what is the side of that. So let's say we cut this in half, and half of that goes over here, and half of that goes over here, so it looks more like a square. Now we can say that we almost have a square, right? And we can say that this is about 8.5, and the side length here is about 8.5 units. So since the side length of that square, since root of 72 is the side length of that square, the root of 72 must be about 8.5 or 8.5. It is always best to estimate first, but you can use a calculator. It is always best to estimate first, but you can use a calculator to calculate a square root. For example, you could estimate the square root of 385 as a bit less than 20, since 20 times 20 is 400. You can use a calculator by pressing the digits for 385 and then the square root button, which often looks like this, right here. The square root of 385 turns out to be 19.62141687, etc. You might estimate this as 19.6 or 19.62. To check your answer, you can press this button right here and right here to square that number. You should get back to 385. If you don't, you know you've made an error. All right, let's look at our key terms. Perfect square, or square number, is a number that results from multiplying a positive integer by itself. The perfect squares are 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, etc. Because these are all the perfect squares. 1 is a perfect square because 1 times 1 is 1. 4 is a perfect square because 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. You can see the pattern. 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 6 is 36. 7 times 7 is 49. For example, 9 is a perfect square since 9 equals 3 times 3. And you can see it makes a perfect square like that. A square root is a number that is multiplied by itself to get another number. For example, the square root of 25 is 5, since 5 times 5 is 25. That's it for today. Thanks for watching.